Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Coast to Coast Combat Hour. I'm your host, Matthew Hawkins, and as always, I'm joined by my co host, Ed Carbajal. Weekly, we are brought to you by AllAccessMMA.com. Check out AllAccessMMA.com for a video podcast, MMA news, and MMA stories of the day. This week, we have the pleasure of bringing in at MMA Injury, Mr. Kevin Nicholson, physical therapist, who, if you follow him on Twitter, likes to fill us in on injuries, especially on this show. He chimes in a lot, so it's a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for your time, Kevin. How's it going?
It's going excellent. Thanks, guys, for having me on. This is great.
Yeah, I mean, well, so just for folks that if you're just watching this for the first time, I mean, Kevin usually chimes in when we're doing picks for events, and he always has some really specific background injury information. So if you're someone that likes making picks on fights, it's usually pertinent to. I mean, at times Matt and I have changed our picks because of the information Kevin chimes in with, and it turns out to be worthy of hearing. So Kevin just started his own YouTube channel. He's been doing a newsletter for a little while too that I've subscribed to. So Kevin, can you just talk us through like what made you want to start doing a YouTube channel, and like how you got into MMA overall?
Sure. I guess my story with MMA goes back many years. My younger brother, Jeff, got me started down this road. And back in 2009, we went to our first live event in Dallas, Texas. And I just was thinking, what the hell? What is this? Is this legal? But I was hooked from that point on. And me when I say being hooked, it was, I guess, from a different angle because I am a physical therapist. I have been for more than 30 more than 30 years at this time. And I was just looking at the injuries that these guys would
Mm-hmm.
fight through and then ultimately come back from. And over the years, I started writing some articles on things I was seeing on fan posts, Bloody Elbow, and a few other outlets, and just for fun, really. And the YouTube channel that I just started is really that's really what it's for, is just for fun. And I've just got to a point after so many years, I just feel like I have something to share,
Mm-hmm.
a little knowledge of anatomy and human movement and what it takes to recover from injuries. And I guess that's it. That's what led me to start this channel. So,
No, that's great. I mean, we've had cut men on. We've had doctors that are more interested, kind of in the brain damage, I guess, taken in during a fight. But you kind of have your own little niche there with the ligaments and and the back and stuff like that. I mean, people who followed the sport forever know, like Tito Ortiz and his issue with his back, and um, it's cool to get the insight on some of that stuff. I mean, I wasn't even aware of half the stuff that you've brought up over time on this show. Um, was there other sports that you followed to get into the industry that you're in? I mean, I'm not sure where you're located, but football, hockey, anything like that that um, you were into heavily before that also has somewhat some of the similar injuries?
yes, I've been a basketball fan since my youth, and I have coached youth basketball leagues
Mm.
for quite a few years, and had my own injuries that I've dealt with over the years subsequent to basketball. But I guess maybe that was the entry into, from the sports angle to it. But MMA was just different. I mean, back in the day when fighters were recovering from injury, it was basically like, rub some dirt on it and tape it up and let's get back in there.
Mm-hmm.
But the sophistication has just come leaps and bounds with the UFC PI and some other angles. And it's something that I want to get into more. There's not a lot. I'm in Amarillo, Texas, in the Texas Panhandle, and there's a couple of MMA type gyms in this area, but maybe even doing some pro bono work for some athletes in the future is something I might want to do as well.
Yeah, because there's that guy. I forget his name, but as soon as I mention it, you're gonna know who I'm talking about. The dude that the chiropractor that's like always hammering people's joints back
Oh
into place.
yeah, yeah, with the beard.
Yeah, yeah. Like see, everyone's seen the guy. I don't know his name, but everyone's seen him. I mean, but as soon as you said you're launching a channel, that's literally where my mind went. I was like, you know what? Because again, I know you're a physical therapist and you have experience in that. But speaking of your experience, I mean, you just mentioned there's gyms in your area. Has any fighters or anybody that does any sort of combat sport come to see you for recovery treatment?
No, I really haven't had that pleasure yet. It's something that I would like to do at some point in the future, but
Mm,
my job right now is in a rehabilitation hospital. I'm a
mm-hmm,
rehab director at a local rehabilitation hospital, have been for years.
mm,
So the people I work with are really messed up.
yeah.
um, Maybe a little older, but not really that many athletes.
Mm,
Um, but MMA athletes is something I would like to get into at some point in the future, I think.
You mentioned Amarillo, Texas, and the first thing that jumped into my mind was Evan Tanner. I'm not sure if with the nod ahead, obviously,
Yeah.
he's from there. So
Yep.
back in the day, there used to be some MMA events. I think he fought Heath Herring and some of
Mm.
those guys in the. I mean, this is
Yep.
90s time MMA, but yeah,
Yeah.
I remember some of those early events out in that area. Um, so since you've been watching MMA, 2009, what's the worst injury that you think you've seen that somebody recovered from among a big name fighter? Is there anything that jumps into your mind where you remember just being kind of fascinated that that person was able to return to the sport?
Well, the first big one was Dominic Cruz and the litany of knee injuries that he had,
mm,
and then I think a hamstring tear, and I mean just one after the other. And I remember listening to interviews that he did at the time where he talked about the inadequacy of the physical therapy that he had at the time. I think that was pre UFC PI.
mm-hmm,
But the physical therapist, it was obvious to me that the PT working with him at that time really wasn't taking into account the kind of person he was and what he did for a living. And you, you you can't treat MMA athletes with, laying on a table and doing leg exercises and things like this. You've got to train around the injury
mm,
and keep them training to some degree as they recover from injury. And that's good that that's becoming more the norm now. But Dominic Cruz's injuries were just epic at the time. I wrote a long article about that some years ago on another venue that dove into his knee injuries.
mm.
Did
You
he
know,
did he just keep tearing the same? Was it the same injury over and over again?
Yeah, well, he ruptured his ACL twice on one knee and once on the other knee as he was recovering.
That's right.
yeah,
And
I remember the one of the interviews where he talked about it a lot was when he was on with Rogan. Was that I think that's 2017. In 2017, after he lost the title, when he talked to Rogan, he had talked about how he kind of believed that the something about antibiotics he had taken a lot during his like youth kind of weakened his connective tissue, and that he kind of cited that as a reason for the injuries. But I mean, do you find that people are just prone to injury? Like there's people that are just their bodies aren't matching what their hearts want them to do.
maybe that could be, especially after a certain age, I guess, and so
Mm,
many miles um, in the fight game. What I think happened with Dominic Cruz, and I don't know that he's ever said this, but the first ACL surgery he had, as I recall, he used a cadaver ligament
mm,
as the replacement. And athletes will oftentimes go that route because the recovery can be faster. There's not as much surgery done to harvest the patella tendon, which is in the front of the knee, to actually use your own tendon to replace that ACL. So the recovery is faster. But the thing is, there's good research that shows us that a cadaver ligament takes longer to incorporate itself into the knee.
mm.
So I think he was feeling better quicker and started to do too much too fast and pop. He was in the same boat again.
do you what would be if you were recommending somebody who was a combat athlete? Um, is there, other than just staying in general shape, would you recommend stretching over? I mean, what would there be a certain anything you can do to really try to avoid those injuries, or a lot of them just bad luck?
There are some specific things, especially with, well, speaking of knees,
Hmm.
with the female fighters. There are some things, some aspects unique to being female that predispose women to ACL injuries.
Hmm.
One of those being, for example, um, weakness of the hip muscles that cause some abnormalities whenever they jump and land on their feet, some abnormalities in contact forces at the knee. So, working on hip muscle strength um, throughout their fight training, for as an example, for a woman, can be very important.
It's interesting that you say that because it just seems like if you, I mean, and you can chime in whenever you feel like, but most common, I mean, we all know. I think everyone that follows MMA knows the initials of the ligaments because they seem to be the most common injury, no matter the promotion or level of the sport. ACL, LCL. It seems to be the knees. I guess that's in never mind combat sport, just any contact sport where quick maneuvering and turns and stuff like that can happen. Is that what you found since you've been following mixed martial arts?
Yes, knees and shoulders.
Hmm.
Um, and there's even some research I was looking at recently that looked at injuries by area of the body of the MMA athlete, and I believe it was knees and shoulders are
Hmm.
pretty far and away the most commonly injured. Um, I think, however, and one of the other PTs I communicate with on Instagram thinks also, I think MMA athletes come back from knee injuries at a higher to compete at their high level
Hmm.
at a more robust clip than athletes in general.
Hmm.
Um, like soccer athletes, football, getting after an ACL reconstruction, getting back to that high level of performance can be a big problem.
Hmm.
Um, and there's a high percentage of them that don't get back to that high elite level of performance.
Hmm.
I don't think that's the case with MMA athletes, and I don't know that there's any research out there that proves that, but that's just what I think, what I see.
It's funny that you say that. A fighter I just spoke to, and I'm sorry his name escapes me. One of the interviews I did, I interview a lot of regional fighters for Expectation Sports. And we literally have like MMA regional events every weekend over at Expectation Sports. And a couple of weeks ago, I just spoke to a fighter that came back after a long layoff, had a knee, the surgery on his knee for the injuries we're talking about, and he literally just said in the interview that not only did he recover, it's actually better than it was before. So I'm wondering.
Mhm.
I mean, and I feel like I've also read like something about getting back to training or moving sooner rather than letting it just rest heal on its own kind of helps with the recovery and everything setting back in can make it help make the everything heal not just faster but better than it
Right,
was before.
right. Early movement and mobilization, just
Hmm.
about with any joint injury, especially with an athlete, is very important because, I mean, years ago with ACL reconstructions, you were in a brace and you had surgery and you weren't weight bearing for weeks after the surgery. That's not the case anymore.
Hmm.
Early mobilization, early control of the knee, just to be able to walk, is a very important keystone of recovery.
Kind of maybe an off the wall question, but as a baseball fan, one of the big surgeries that has really become something that almost guys almost seem to want to have nowadays. Is the Tommy John surgery on their elbow. Do you know of any MMA fighters that have ever had that surgery? And I know that most of that's, if I'm, I'm not a physical therapist, but I believe most of that's from like the torque on the elbow, from throwing like curveballs and off speed pitches. Do you foresee that ever becoming a problem in MMA on that part of the arm and that part of the elbow?
That I think the most recent example of that I can think of is um, Jessica Rose Clark when
Mm.
she had a horrible armbar, uh, and it was
UFC
nasty.
272 against I think it was that Russian girl.
Right.
I was at that fight. Yeah, that was nasty. It popped
Oh, it
out.
was horrible. And she, right away, within the next few days, she was very prolific on her Instagram account about the injury, and she was headed for surgery, but she has recovered completely without surgery, and I expect her to get a fight booked anytime. But I followed that with a lot of interest because,
Mm.
from what I could tell, that's essentially what that was: ulnar collateral ligament rupture. Um, the Tommy John type injury, if you will, and she recovered amazingly for it. It was very interesting to follow.
Huh.
How do you I mean, do you ever find yourself like as far as just keeping up with all the injuries, because you seem to have, especially when we're doing our picks and you chime in, you always seem to have some sort of like it's almost like you have like a backlog of information, especially when it comes to a specific fighter. I forget who it was when you mentioned somebody that just fought one of the last few picks we did, Matt, that had the hand injury that he was recovering from. Fought a couple of events, maybe one of the last two events of last year. I can't remember who it was, but just how do you keep up with it all and keep up all with all the specifics? Are you keeping notes, or is it all
Yeah,
just up here?
Google spreadsheets.
Mm,
I've got a spreadsheet um, that I update whenever with ones that I want to follow to some degree. I mean, there's so many injuries. It's
yeah.
impossible, with a full-time job and everything to keep up. But I've got a Google spreadsheet. It's accessible anytime, even on my phone. And I hear something, I'll pop in the bathroom at work and update my Google spreadsheet on my phone. But
Yeah.
um, even the Chinese fighter that was supposed to fight Pedro is out with an injury, and Modestus Bukauskas, who himself is an amazing recovery story after that. His knee was wrecked by Khalil Roundtree, but
Mm,
he's back to fight Pedro now. And that I saw someone else posted something about that. I can't recall the Chinese fighter's name that had to pull out, but it's possibly a flare up of a long standing injury. Well, that's the type of thing that gets me interested
mm,
because, long standing injuries that flare up, the first thing I'm thinking of is a spine problem, a low back
mm.
pain. Low back pain can be extremely debilitating, and you don't know sometimes when it's going to hit. Derek Lewis, he had that issue for a long time back a few years ago.
I think the fight you might have been referencing was Alex Morano. Was he the one that had hand injuries against Ponzinibbio? I think
Maybe
might
so.
might
Gosh,
have been the fight. I
yeah.
think that was the one. Looking back at the last couple of events. So your YouTube channel, you kick that off with a episode about Jessica Andrade as she prepared to fight Lauren Murphy this past weekend at UFC 283. Um, I listened to it again before the show just to get a fresh account, and basically, I mean, she didn't look. You pretty much nailed it. She didn't really show any signs of injury. She came out in her full on, uh, without better word, bull rush style of just constant attack. Through with the power that she didn't lose any power.
Mhm.
We didn't get a chance to really see. The only thing that I don't recall in the fight her ever trying to really pick up Murphy and slam. So that might be something, a story to be told down the line. But I mean, It sounds to me like on your first video, you nailed it better than me and Ed did with our picks. That's for damn sure.
Oh yeah, picks were horrible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that I,
Brandon
I
was the only one I got right. Brandon Moreno was the only one I got right.
I I kind of regret not buying the pay-per-view, but I'll be honest with you here. I've gotten a little more selective as the
Mhm.
price keeps going up and up with the UFC events.
Oh yeah.
Um, because I mean that's a nice chunk of money,
Hmm.
and I play games with myself in my head, and I'm like, man, what if it's just nothing, and there's nothing to any of the fights, and nothing that I really find interesting, because I always want to find something interesting
Hmm.
with the way a fighter moves, or the way they're not moving, or how they react to a kick, things like this. But
Mm.
I guess I should just bite the bullet and do it, huh?
Well, but you make a really good point. If you bite the bullet and do it, then you're going to put yourself in the poorhouse because it's like $100 a pay per view now.
No.
So you can't really bite the bullet and do it. I mean, unless you watch it through, as Matt and I like to always say, other means.
Yeah.
But it's funny that what you just said made me think of, because over in the middle of the night they announced UFC 286, Usman Edwards 3, and Justin Gaethje Fiziev is on that card. And as I looked at the whole card, because I get the press release for it, I'm looking at the whole card and I'm just like, I mean, and you follow the podcast, so the only fight I care about is Justin Gaethje and Fiziev, and I'm just like, because the rest of them are kind of just like, meh. I mean, like that's one that you know that's going to be hard to sell that one. I mean, Justin Gaethje, is an immediate buy for me, but when you look at the price, like you said, I mean, and the
Yes.
economy and everything, it is hard. It's getting hard to be a hobbyist of watching mixed martial arts, and especially the UFC these days. So, do you find yourself watching other promotions more now?
Um, I started getting into PFL a little bit. I really enjoyed some of the PFL fights.
Mm.
I didn't really dig into them a whole lot. I just kind of watched as a fan whenever I could. So, but I wasn't going to buy the pay-per-view to see
No,
Harrison.
no,
So,
no, 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 no. But yeah, I mean, it's as somebody who attends events and sees the
Yeah.
ticket prices now. It's definitely changed my
Oh yeah.
perspective on being able to go to the events now, because it's becoming, as we've talked about a million times, it's becoming kind of a one percenter, um, to keep up like
Uh,
we used to do it back in the day. Um,
Have you guys ever seen that movie Game Night? where where one of the conversations they have is that there's rich people fight clubs, like that's their party now. They have these rich people fight clubs. It's like the UFC is becoming the rich people fight club now.
yeah,
But go ahead, Matt.
it
Sorry, I didn't
goes
mean
that
to.
way. No, no, I mean that it's we don't need to rant on that. We've done it a million times.
Yeah.
Um, I guess just I'm kind of done with questions. Do you have a topic for your next show? Is there anything we can look forward to? And what are you going to try to do it on a certain day of the week? Are you going to try to do multiple a week? What's your plan going forward?
well, I want to do one a week for sure. I've, I may at some point in time get into some doing a live bit after a fight
Mm.
card, when there's something of interest that I want to put up. But coming up, I'm probably going to do a video just looking at kind of how I watch fights
Mm.
specific to the shoulder and the knee for fighters who are coming back from surgery
Yeah.
on those specific joints, and some specific fighter breakdowns like I did
Mm.
on my first one. Probably Casey O'Neill coming back from ACL, and Tatiana Suarez. Oh my gosh, with her
Mm.
being out so long, she's just uh, there's just so much to talk about with her. So
Mm-hmm.
those are things I'm looking at in over the coming weeks.
Is there something like that you look at when you see a fighter returning off of as somebody that has the experience of helping folks get over, getting their mobility back and stuff like that? Is there something that you look for when you see them coming back to fight, as like if it is a knee thing, do you look for missteps in their movement and stuff like that to see if they're coming back too early? Like, what's something that you catch that the layman like us just watching these folks face off at weigh-ins wouldn't see?
Right. Well, speaking of knees, when a fighter comes back from an ACL reconstruction, the one thing that I always look for is if they take a hard kick to the outside of the leg,
Mm,
of the operated leg, placed right at the knee. I want to see what happens to their leg.
mm,
If it goes into what's called a valgus position or an inward buckling,
hmm,
or if they just, you know, if they switch their stance right away and they don't change back, these little things tell me that that hurt or that
hmm,
bothered them and they weren't really prepared for it. But those kicks to the outside of the leg for those
hmm,
fighters that have had ACL reconstruction, that's one of the things I always look for.
hmm.
Yeah, I always cringe seeing John Jones
Yeah.
do that, knee
Oh
stomp,
God,
you know.
he he changes fighters.
Yeah, that it's funny you're saying that because that's actually what I was going to ask. When you see that happen, as somebody that's on the other side helping people get over the outcome of those attacks, I mean, does it make you cringe more? And I mean, as somebody like I've been doing martial arts over 30 years of my life. I've seen some pretty bad things. I've had injuries myself, and I've seen some pretty bad things happen. Nothing as serious as to what happens to because I'm a hobbyist versus these professional fighters. So nothing as serious as what happens to them. But even still, like I find myself, as somebody that like I have a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I have knowledge on how to bend people's limbs the other way and things like that. But still, when I see it happen to the extreme, for instance, did you see the I don't know if you watch One Championship, the Mikey Musumeci um Mongolian dude's leg that he
Oh
literally
yeah, it just
separated. Yeah.
destroyed his knee. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you see something like that, are you just like, oh God, I hope that guy don't send that guy to Amarillo, Texas?
No.
Because yeah.
Yeah. That was an extreme injury. I think he ruptured every ligament in his knee. I mean, someone was talking on some one of the social media platforms about,
Mm,
he might be back within a year, but I just don't see that.
mm.
That kind of an injury, that's a year and a half, I'm sure.
Yeah, they read off the list of the injuries. I mean, it was all the ligaments, so MCL, ACL, all the L's, and then the ankle break at the end at the end of the leg, like
Yeah.
breaking the bone.
Hmm.
And the guy literally, I mean, I was probably crying more at home watching that happen than he. I don't know how people do that, but and even Musumeci was for a while messed up over it. And I saw he did an interview with SCMP, the folks that the South China Morning Post, who they cover One Championship a lot, and on their YouTube channel, he kind of just said, "Yeah, it was bothering me, but the opponent, the guy that received the injury, was like, no, it's part of the game. Don't worry about it. Congratulations on your win." So he's kind of trying to own it. If you know anything about Musumeci, he's like a weird nerdy kid, but I wouldn't say that to him and then want to go grapple with him because obviously, but
He'd probably
yes,
agree with you, and then he'd spin your leg around.
yeah, turn it the other way, yeah.
Can the quote I heard about that, they compared it to like a motorcycle accident, and I
Hmm.
know some people have been in motorcycle accidents, and they were lucky basically to keep their leg.
Yeah.
Um, can you suffer an injury like that and it cost you your leg, or are we so good with our doctors now that basically you're going to get some kind of use? I mean, let's say he never competes again. Is there a potential chance where you can't walk, or are we to the point where we can pretty much get him to be able to live a semi, normal life?
Yeah. From a purely surgical and rehabilitative standpoint, yes, that
Mm,
people recover from things like that all the time. Whether he'll compete at the level he has been competing at, I don't know. But as far as losing the leg that you mentioned in your question, the risk there is because of the surgery that he's going to have, which will be extensive, and maybe even more than one, by the way,
mhm,
is the risk of infection.
mm,
Because
Staph,
you get an
yeah.
infection in something like that, and then the surgically repaired or replaced ligaments get infected, then you're on a road of pain from that point. That's where the risk of something like losing a leg would come from, I think.
Mm. Um, do you? Because I mean, it's almost like I don't want to say it's a new niche for the sport, but like I'm adding you to this list. Obviously, that's why I subscribe to your newsletter and your channel. Which by the way is in the description. It'll be in the description of the audio and video versions of the podcast for
Thank
folks
you.
that want to subscribe. You do you follow anyone else that's kind of like there's because I follow Dr. Brian Sutterer who has a YouTube channel. He
He's good.
covers yeah, he's really good. And he does all sports, not just combat sports, but he almost does almost every single like any significant injury that goes viral. He does a very good breakdown. And then there's Dr. David Abisi, who I know he does a lot of stuff on Twitter. I don't know if he has a YouTube channel as well. I'm sure he does, and a couple of other people out there. So like, I mean,
Mm.
it seems to be like there's more folks like that and like yourself that are growing. Do you follow any of those? Obviously, you follow. You said you follow Sutter. Is there anyone else that you follow or recommend?
Oh yeah, Dr. Steve Mora, Mora. He's an
Mm-hmm.
orthopedic surgeon in California, and he works a lot on MMA athletes.
Mm,
He posts outstanding content on um, surgical videos for just about everything.
mm,
Also, um, Mike Pakowski, and I might be pronouncing his last name wrong. He on Instagram, he goes by Dr. Kickass. He's a BJJ black belt, but he's
oh,
also a
nice.
physical therapist. And I mean, his insight is just really good because he is he's a BJJ practitioner. He's
Yeah.
active, and he does that's his focus of his
Mm,
PT practice is injured MMA athletes.
mm. Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons we like to have we have him on almost annually now. Dr. John Lucas, who's he's I mean, I know he still works in the emergency room in South Carolina, but he's also the state ringside physician. And I know he's got an event going on this weekend that Matt's going to talk about in a little bit. But um, he's a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu too, and follows he trains at Wonder Boys gym. So he's somebody that's connected to the sport too. That I think guys like that they have it. Their passion gives them a unique eye for it, and that's the same thing I'm noticing with you. With the work that you have. I mean, you've got more experience doing PT than, and that's more years doing that than the sport. The UFC is about to turn 30. You said you've been doing it for 30 plus years, so I think the I think the insight you're going to have, especially with as the sport gets bigger, it's going to help a lot of fans and people that just want to know more about, especially when it comes to recovery, because injuries are always gruesome, and then you see them, and then you kind of just most people kind of forget about a fighter, but someone like yourself could say, well, we can see them in like, certain amount of months based on the injury and your experience. So I think that's
Right.
something that folks that listen to this podcast would like to get into.
That's absolutely right. That's what I hope to offer. Just a little insight on another. I guess that's my lane in
Mm-hmm.
MMA is fighter injuries, rehab, and recovery.
You mentioned John Lucas, and one of the reasons to bring him up this weekend. He, like you said, since he joined the athletic commission for South Carolina, they were able to get a deal done with bare knuckle, making it legal in the state of South Carolina, and they had a BYB event in December, but BKFC makes their debut this Friday night for BKFC 35. Few names of note on the card: Andy Wynn, never fought in the UFC, but fought in Glory and or Lion Fight. I don't know about Glory and King of the Cage and a bunch of the more regional shows. She gets back in the BKFC circle. Paul Teague. If anybody remembers his infamous interview on this podcast, he returns against apparently local hero out there, so that should be interesting. And Yo, Yos Denise Cedeno, who fought in UFC.
Mm-hmm.
I think saw him fight at UFC. I want to say 171, might have been 67, but he is the headliner on the card. Um, as he's it's a title eliminator fight at welterweight. So those are also Marcus Brimage, who most people probably will remember from losing to Conor McGregor.
Mm.
He fights on the card as well. So that's this Friday night. It's also free on Fight. They tweeted it out, so there's not a ton of fight action going on this weekend. But if you have the Fight app on
Mm.
Friday night, they're doing a free broadcast of the event. So if you're not super familiar with bare knuckle fighting, it's a chance to get a nice little taste of it. And I'm sure you'll see Doc Lucas in the cage working his magic and trying to save or allow fighters to continue to compete. I guess of other quick note that we mentioned, we did the picks for UFC 283. The main event that night, uh, Glover Teixeira versus Jamal Hill. Hill takes the decision. I'm not sure. I know you said you didn't watch it, Kevin. I don't know if you read up on that, but it was pretty much a one-sided beatdown. Glover did his thing as far as showing the heart and the toughness of a champion, which he
Mm.
was. It is. But he left his gloves in the ring along with Shogun Hua, two guys who I mean,
Yeah.
spent the last 20 years of my life watching. So it was sad to see it end that way. But I mean, just two great ambassadors of the sport. Um, and Shogun, a guy who came back from several injuries over his
I
career
lost
from
count of his knee injuries 10 years ago.
from snapping his arm. An idea for an old show that
Yeah.
would get some old heads like me interested is if you went back through the kind of the history of MMA and maybe documented some of those guys that some of those injuries before there was a lot of social media and stuff, and we learned about them. I know Fedor fights next week. His issue was always a broken hand for about a 2-3 year period.
Mm.
He seems to have avoided the knees and shoulder issues, but might be a topic, especially on a down week to jump into. You mentioned Dominic Cruz earlier, but that would be something to, maybe as guys start getting in the Hall of Fame. I don't know if Aldo had a history of many injuries, but that kind of stuff might
Mm.
be something for some topics for your show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, you want to get into? I see you're taking notes too.
Yeah.
So I want to give you a couple just because you mentioned that as we said knees and you said knees and shoulders were the top of the list for like injuries. I felt like there was like a month within the same month when TJ Dillashaw's shoulder popped out. Just before that, the similar injury happened to Aaron Pico over at Bellator, where he literally tried to pop it back in place. I don't know if you saw that, but it's on YouTube now. You should definitely give it a watch.
Yeah. I think he injured his shoulder worse trying to get it back in.
yeah. That was
Yeah.
that's just something that I mean, it's again when I think about guys like you and Dr. Brian Sutter and people that see stuff like that, you got to be sitting at home saying, "What are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
why are you? What's wrong with you?" Especially Aaron Pico was trying to act like he was all right. Like he
Yeah.
could still fight. Whereas TJ Dillashaw was like, no, I'm done. This thing ain't working. So
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of fighters right now with shoulder injuries besides TJ. Of course, Yuri is out, and
what's your take on Brandon Royval? We've had him on the podcast, and he seems to have like every joint in his body pop loose when he gets ready for a fight. I feel bad for him because he's a guy that his heart is into it, but his body's not agreeing with him.
right. That's I don't know what to think about him, to be honest with you. I just wonder if there's something, I don't know, something with connective tissue or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel bad for him because it seems like one of those things that it's just like it's not something he can help. It just seems like he's got like a Gumby body that he can't, and I'm not trying to insult him. Actually, we had him on the podcast. I mean, he said he's trying to be like the next Miguel Torres, and me and Matt were like, we're all about it, but unfortunately, like he's a little bit too much like Miguel Torres in the sense that because Miguel Torres, like he had his leg kicked like the wrong way, right? That's what ended his career. I in a kickboxing match, if I'm remembering correctly, but it's just like Jesus, man. I mean, some of these guys. I mean, I think that's what draws us to the sport too, like especially hobbyists and fans of martial arts. It's like you see these guys; they're just their minds are someplace else. But the Grand Prix that Bellator just had, It was supposed to be Aaron Pico in that, and his shoulder's still not. I forget how long ago that happened, but like what's and just off the top of your head, based on you seeing shoulder things, and like what's the recovery time for something like that, for a shoulder just completely popping loose?
Well, if there's rotator cuff damage along with joint damage, like the labrum, the
Mm-hmm.
the part where the shoulder sits on, which is actually part of the shoulder blade.
Mm-hmm.
If the labrum had to be repaired, um, as well as the rotator cuff, as well as the capsule, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there, there's potential for all of those to be damaged with such a frank, absolute dislocation like that. So I don't know the details of what happened with him, but uh, all of those things kind of stack up on each other to prolong a recovery, especially with the shoulder. And the bad thing about the shoulder is it's so mobile.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's not a lot of inherent stability. Stability is provided primarily by muscle tissue. So, like whenever a punch is being thrown, that's
Yeah.
like the transfer point
Yeah.
of power from the legs. And if the shoulder's messed up, then that's a problem. But he's
I
going to
f-
be out a while,
yeah.
for sure.
I forget who it was in boxing. I remember someone in boxing threw a hard jab or a hook or something and just swung their own arm out of the socket. I mean, I think we've seen it in MMA too. I mean, it just is
Junior
that.
Dos Santos did it
There you go. Yeah.
against Castro in Eagle FC. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
he threw his arm out with a punch.
Those are people that have probably done that before,
Mm.
and it wasn't to a point of needing surgical repair. Even with TJ, I think maybe he had a shoulder surgery before, but you know, even he had said it was coming out all the time in his fight camp leading up to that Sterling fight.
Is that something? Because like to me, like if something pops out of place, is it automatic you need surgery, or I mean, are you supposed to just live your life with this shoulder that pops in and out, like what's his name in Lethal Weapon? Like it just seems like that shouldn't be a thing. I don't
No,
know.
no, there. Uh, Probably if it happens once, you're more prone for it to happen again.
Mm,
However, if it's caught soon and treated appropriately, um, people can go on and lead their lives. I've had numerous patients over the years,
mm,
albeit not MMA athletes,
mm,
but I worked for years in a veterans hospital and treated, I mean, just some ungodly injuries from
mm,
combat
mm,
with some of these veterans, and shoulder injuries was among those, and trying to avoid surgery. And we did pretty well with those guys, getting them back to a level of function where they could trust that their shoulder wasn't going to,
mm,
dislocate with simple movements.
mm. Oh man. Well, listen, it was super interesting to talk to you and help. I mean, I hope your appearance on this podcast, so hopefully our audience can become your audience too. And
Outstanding.
it's definitely something that I mean, I could talk to you forever. I know I keep throwing questions at you, but it's something, again, as somebody that's over the hill and still training and worried about his own joints,
Yeah.
then covering a sport for all the outlets I write for, and when I see stuff like that happen, guys like yourself and Stutterer and BC and all these guys, and I noted the two folks you told me about, so I can start following them too. We definitely like to have you back on. This was definitely enjoy. I enjoyed doing this. I'm sure Matt did too. But let folks know where they can find. I know you're on Twitter, and I know you got your newsletter. Did you have it on review, or you move it to Substack, or after your newsletter?
No, it is on Substack. It's
Okay.
the MMA injury, the
Mm.
MMA injury update, and I'm on Twitter at MMA injury, and that's the name of my YouTube channel. So pretty
How long
simple.
have you had that Twitter handle? It's amazing you managed to get MMA injury without having to put a
I've had
21 behind it.
I actually got that handle twice.
Oh
I was on
wow.
Twitter for a while, and I threw a big fit whenever John Jones and Gustafsson had their second fight. Remember when he popped for, what was it, Turinabol,
And they
and
moved
they
it
moved
to
it to
LA.
California?
Uh-huh.
I had tickets for that fight in Vegas,
Oh, I ended
And
up
I
with
was just
tickets in
like,
LA.
I was like, I'm done. I mean, I shut down my Twitter. I stopped talking to anybody about MMA injury, and then okay, I guess I don't need to get back. After a while, I just missed it so much, and it was still there, MMA injury. So I started all over.
That's
That's
funny.
incredible.
That's a great question too. I didn't even think about that. I'm like, yeah, how did you? Yeah, because there's MMA gods and analytics and analysts and this and that, and I'm just like, I mean, look at my handle's my gamer tag. Like back when I used to play video games against people online, like literally before
Yeah. And the
Ultimate.
original MMA Hawk has one post from 2008 and still has the name locked in. But anyways, so at MMA Injury, Kevin Nicholson PT is how I found you easiest on YouTube. Your page popped right up.
Descriptions in the podcast and
I
this
noticed you
episode
had an
too.
Instagram page. Is that pretty much defunct right now?
No, I
Do you still use it?
I just don't do a whole lot on Instagram, but I do that mainly for following fighters and creeping on their training after after injury. So yeah.
Yeah,
Nice.
that's pretty much why. I mean, I try to be more active on Instagram too, but I use it more for the same thing and looking at hot chicks. That's pretty much it.
All right. Well, fans can always check out the show at Combat Hour on Twitter, Coast to Coast Combat Hour on Instagram. Follow me, Matthew Hawkins, at MMA Hawk 21 on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow Ed at Carbazol on Twitter, Carbeerzol on Instagram, and Old Head Carb on Twitch. And as always, you can check us out at allaccessmma.com for our video podcast. And we don't usually mention it, but our YouTube channel is the Blogboard Jungle. So that's another way to look us up on YouTube if you have a trouble Google search or just searching Coast to Coast Combat Hour. So thank you for your time, Kevin. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys. It's been a
Best of luck
pleasure.
with your show.
Thanks
I
for
love your
making time,
show,
man.
and thanks for letting me on here.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening, everyone, and have a good night.